Most people communicate with avoidance as if they were anxious or secure. They express their feelings openly. They ask for reassurance. They try to process emotions together. And then they wonder why the avoidant withdraws further, why their vulnerability creates distance instead of closeness, why honest communication seems to make things worse. The problem isn't that communication is bad. It's that avoidants have a completely different nervous system response to emotional expression. What sounds like connection to you registers as threat to them. What feels like intimacy to you feels like engulfment to them. Understanding what an avoidant actually needs to hear requires abandoning everything you think you know about healthy relationship communication and entering their psychological reality. The words that reach them are not the words that would reach you. And if you want any chance of genuine connection, you need to speak their language before expecting them to learn yours. The pressure release statement. The single most powerful thing you can say to an avoidant is some variation of this. I'm not trying to trap you or change you. You're free. This statement needs to be delivered without resentment, without passive aggression, without the subtext of, you should want to stay anyway. It must be genuine. Subscribe to get the exact psychological frameworks that explain why certain communication works with avoidance, while other approaches push them further away. The avoidance core terror is engulfment, the loss of self, being consumed by someone else's needs. Every expression of your emotional needs can trigger this terror unless you explicitly release the pressure. They need to hear that you're not trying to control them, that their autonomy is safe with you, that you won't use their feelings against them. This statement works because it directly addresses their deepest fear. The avoidant has learned that expressing need or allowing closeness leads to obligation, demand, and loss of freedom. They've had experiences where love came with strings attached, where intimacy meant giving up themselves. When you explicitly give them permission to be free, when you communicate that you're not trying to trap them, their nervous system can begin to relax. The defensive walls don't need to be quite so high because you're not positioned as threat. This doesn't mean they'll immediately open up, but it creates space where opening might become possible. The avoidant needs to know that connection with you doesn't mean losing themselves. The critical element is that this statement must be true. You cannot manipulate an avoidant with false promises of freedom while actually expecting them to meet your needs or be consistently available. They will sense the manipulation and withdraw completely. The freedom you offer must be real, which means you must genuinely be okay with them taking space, being inconsistent, or even choosing to leave. This is the paradox of connecting with avoidance. You must be willing to lose them to have any chance of keeping them. You must actually mean it when you say they're free, even if that freedom means they choose to go. Only when the pressure is truly removed can the avoidant begin to consider connection on terms that feel safe. The non-emotional need expression. Avoidants shut down when emotional needs are expressed with intensity or urgency. Your tears, your pain, your vulnerability often push them away because these displays trigger their own suppressed emotions and their terror of being responsible for someone else's feelings. But avoidance can respond to needs expressed in calm, factual, non-emotional language. Instead of, I feel so hurt when you don't call me back. It makes me feel like you don't care about me, and I don't know if you even want this relationship. Try, I need more consistent communication. Can we agree on checking in every other day? The difference is night and day for the avoidant nervous system. The non-emotional approach works because it presents a problem to solve rather than an emotion to manage. Avoidants often have strong problem-solving capabilities, but poor emotional processing skills. When you frame your needs as logistics rather than feelings, the avoidant can engage their competent, rational self rather than their terrified, defended emotional self. They can consider whether they're willing to check in every other day without having to process the weight of your pain or the implications of your emotional dependence. The request is clear, bounded, and doesn't require them to dive into emotional territory they find threatening. This communication style requires you to do your own emotional processing before talking to the avoidant. You need to feel your hurt, process your fear, and work through your insecurity separately, perhaps with a therapist or trusted friends. By the time you communicate with the avoidant, you need to be regulated enough to present your needs calmly and clearly. This isn't about suppressing your emotions or making them invalid. It's about recognizing that the avoidant cannot be your primary source of emotional regulation. They don't have the capacity to hold your emotional intensity and remain present. If you need them to hear you, you must meet them where their capacity allows. The appreciation without obligation. Avoidants respond powerfully to genuine appreciation that comes without hidden expectations. I really enjoyed when we cooked together last week, or I appreciate that you helped me with that project registers differently than you never spend quality time with me, or why can't you help me more often? The appreciation acknowledges what they did offer without pointing to what they didn't. This matters enormously because the avoidant is constantly aware of their inadequacy in relationships. They know they're not meeting emotional needs the way others might. Criticism confirms their worst beliefs about being defective. Appreciation that doesn't come with obligation shows them that their efforts, however limited, are seen and valued. The key is that the appreciation must be specific and genuine, not strategic. You cannot use appreciation to manipulate the avoidant into doing more. They will sense that your acknowledgement of the dinner you cooked together is really a veiled request for more time together, and they'll withdraw from the manipulation. The appreciation must be about genuinely seeing and valuing what they gave without attaching it to what you wish they would give. When the avoidant feels appreciated without feeling pressured, they often naturally want to give more. The absence of obligation creates safety, and safety allows their guarded generosity to emerge. This approach also helps the avoidant see that you notice their efforts. Because they cannot show love through emotional expression the way others do, they often show it through actions, fixing things, helping with tasks, being reliable in practical ways. These offerings are their version of intimacy, but they often go unacknowledged because partners are focused on the emotional availability that's missing. When you notice and appreciate their way of showing care, even if it's not your preferred love language, you communicate that you see them. This being seen for what they do offer, rather than judged for what they cannot offer, creates a foundation where more connection becomes possible. The boundary that protects both. Avoidants need to hear clear boundaries delivered without anger or resentment. I'm not available for inconsistent communication. I need to know where we stand. Or, I can't continue this relationship without more emotional presence. I need you to start therapy, or we need to end this. Sounds harsh, but avoidants respect boundaries more than they respect emotional pleas. The boundary communicates self-respect and gives the avoidant clear information about what's actually available in the relationship. It removes ambiguity and allows them to make a genuine choice about whether they can meet those terms. The boundary works because it doesn't ask the avoidant to change for you. It states what you need and what will happen if that need isn't met. The avoidant is free to choose. They can meet the boundary or they can leave. Either choice is acceptable, and communicating that both choices are acceptable is crucial. The avoidant must feel that you're not trying to control their choice, only informing them of your limits. This framework respects their autonomy while also protecting your well-being. It says, I value myself enough to require these conditions, rather than, you're wrong and need to fix yourself. The boundary also helps the avoidant by removing the burden of trying to figure out what you need. Many avoidants are genuinely confused about relationship expectations. They don't naturally understand emotional needs because they've suppressed their own. Clear boundaries provide a roadmap. The avoidant knows exactly what's required and can assess whether they're capable of providing it. If they choose to stay and meet the boundary, they've made an informed choice. If they can't meet it and leave, that's also important information. The boundary prevents the dynamic where the avoidant gradually fails to meet unspoken needs until the relationship implodes in confusion and blame. The externalized problem framework. Avoidants respond better when relationship issues are framed as problems external to both people rather than as flaws in the avoidant themselves. Instead of, your avoidance is destroying our relationship, try, we're dealing with different attachment styles that create a challenging dynamic. How do we work with this? The shift from blame to collaborative problem-solving changes everything. The avoidant doesn't have to defend against accusations of being defective. They can engage with the problem as something to solve together, which activates their competence rather than their shame. This framework works because it acknowledges that both people contribute to the dynamic. You're not casting the avoidant as the villain and yourself as the victim. You're recognizing that your attachment styles interact in ways that create difficulty. The anxious partner's pursuit can trigger the avoidant's withdrawal, which triggers more pursuit, creating a spiral neither person wants. When you frame it as a systemic problem, rather than the avoidant's personal failing, they can hear it. They can consider their role without drowning in shame about being broken or wrong. The externalized approach also opens space for the avoidant to take responsibility, without it feeling like annihilation. If the problem is my attachment style rather than who I am as a person, the avoidant can admit to patterns without feeling that admission proves they're fundamentally unlovable. They can say, yes, I do withdraw when things get close, without that statement confirming their worst fears about being defective. The separation between pattern and identity is crucial. The avoidant needs to know they can acknowledge their limitations without those limitations defining their entire worth. The low-pressure future talk. When discussing the future with an avoidant, pressure is poison. Instead of, where is this relationship going? I need to know if you're serious about me. Try, I'm enjoying what we have right now. I'm not in a rush, but I am curious how you're feeling about things as they are. The second approach acknowledges present connection without demanding commitment or forcing the avoidant to predict their future feelings. It creates space for them to share without feeling trapped by their answer. Avoidants panic when forced to make commitments because commitment feels like closing off escape routes. They need to know they can stay without promising forever, that present connection doesn't obligate future connection. When you communicate that you're not trying to lock them into anything, that you're genuinely asking how they feel rather than trying to extract promises, they can sometimes access and share their actual feelings. The key is being genuinely okay with uncertainty. If you're asking about the future to manage your anxiety, the avoidant will feel the pressure behind the question and shut down. This low-pressure approach doesn't mean you never discuss the future or never have expectations. It means you build toward future conversations slowly, establishing safety first. Once the avoidant trusts that you won't use their vulnerability against them, once they've seen that expressing feelings doesn't immediately lead to increased demands, they become more capable of future-oriented conversation. But rushing to lock them down, to get commitment before trust is established, guarantees failure. The avoidant needs to learn through experience that opening to you is safe before they can risk bigger openings about future possibilities. The validation of their experience. Avoidants rarely have their internal experience validated. Most people tell them they're wrong to need space, wrong to struggle with intimacy, wrong to be how they are. What they need to hear is, "It makes sense that closeness feels threatening given what you experienced," or, "I understand that you need to withdraw sometimes to feel safe." This validation doesn't mean you're endorsing their patterns or accepting treatment that doesn't work for you. It means you're acknowledging that their experience is real and valid even if it's not what you would feel in the same situation. The validation works because the avoidant has spent their life being told their needs and feelings are wrong. They learned early that needing space meant something was wrong with them, that not being emotionally effusive meant they were cold or broken. When someone finally says, "Your needs make sense," when someone validates their experience without trying to change it, the avoidant feels a rare moment of being truly seen. This doesn't immediately change their patterns, but it creates a foundation of trust. The avoidant begins to consider that maybe this person is safe, that maybe they won't be judged or rejected for their authentic experience. The validation must be genuine and not strategic. You cannot validate the avoidant as a technique to get them to change. You must actually come to a place where you understand that their attachment style developed for real reasons, that their needs are valid even if incompatible with yours, that they're not deliberately trying to hurt you even when their behavior does hurt. This authentic understanding transforms how you communicate. Your words carry different energy when they come from real empathy rather than strategic accommodation. The avoidant can feel the difference. The space-giving action. Sometimes what the avoidant needs to hear is communicated through action rather than words. When they withdraw and you don't chase, when they create distance and you respect it, when they need space and you give it without punishment or guilt, these actions speak louder than any verbal communication. The avoidant learns that you mean what you say about not trapping them. They learn that space doesn't equal abandonment, that you're still there when they return, that their need for distance doesn't destroy the connection. This space giving is perhaps the hardest thing for anxious partners to do because it triggers their own abandonment fears. But it's essential for avoidant trust. The avoidant needs to test whether you'll really let them go, whether you'll respect their boundaries, whether you'll stay consistent even when they withdraw. When you pass these tests by genuinely giving space without making them wrong for needing it, you build trust that no amount of verbal reassurance could create. The avoidant begins to believe that maybe connection with you is safe because it doesn't require them to give up themselves. The action of space giving must be clean. You cannot give space while sending passive-aggressive messages, while making them feel guilty, while withdrawing your own affection as punishment. The space must be genuine and boundaried. You give it freely, and you maintain your own well-being while they're taking it. This might mean you engage with friends, pursue hobbies, or simply live your life rather than waiting anxiously for their return. When the avoidant sees that you're okay without them, that you have a full life that includes but doesn't depend on them, it paradoxically makes them more likely to return and stay. They feel less responsible for your well-being and less afraid that you'll consume them. The growth acknowledgement. When the avoidant makes any move toward greater openness or emotional availability, acknowledge it explicitly. I noticed you shared how you were feeling about work today. I appreciate you letting me in. Or, thank you for staying present during that conversation, even though I know it was uncomfortable. These acknowledgments reinforce the behavior you want to see more of. The avoidant is taking genuine risks when they show up more fully. Acknowledging those risks without making a big deal that could create pressure helps them see that emotional presence leads to positive response rather than increased demands. The acknowledgement must be proportional to what was offered. If the avoidant shared one feeling, don't respond as if they've just proposed marriage. Don't use their small opening as leverage to ask for more. Simply acknowledge what they did offer and let it be enough. This restraint is crucial. The avoidant needs to learn that giving a little doesn't immediately result in you wanting everything. They need to experience that emotional sharing has a natural endpoint, that it doesn't spiral into endless emotional processing or increased expectations. When they see that showing up a bit doesn't lead to being consumed, they become more willing to show up again. The growth acknowledgement also helps the avoidant see themselves differently. They're so focused on their failures and inadequacies in relationship that they often don't notice their own progress. When you point out specific moments where they were more open, more present, or more emotionally available, you help them build a different narrative about themselves. They begin to see evidence that maybe they can do relationship, that maybe they're not completely broken, that small steps toward intimacy are possible even if big leaps feel impossible. This alternative narrative becomes crucial for continued growth. The realistic limitation acceptance. One of the most loving things you can communicate to an avoidant is, I see your limitations and I'm choosing you anyway. Or, I understand you can't give me everything I might want, and I'm making a conscious choice about whether that works for me. This communication removes the avoidant's burden of feeling they need to be someone they're not. It acknowledges reality clearly. They have limitations. You have needs. There may be gaps between the two. You're assessing whether the gaps are acceptable, and you're communicating that their limitations don't make them unworthy of love. This acceptance must be genuine rather than martyred. You cannot say, "I accept your limitations," while radiating resentment about those limitations. The acceptance must come from a place where you've genuinely evaluated what this person can offer, where you've decided that what they can give is valuable enough even with what they cannot give, or where you've decided it's not enough and you're leaving. Either way, the communication is honest. You're not trying to change them into someone else. You're seeing them clearly and making a choice based on reality rather than potential. The realistic acceptance also frees the avoidant from the exhausting performance of trying to be someone they're not. Many avoidants spend enormous energy pretending to be more available than they are, forcing themselves into emotional expression that doesn't feel natural, trying desperately to meet needs they don't have capacity to meet. When you communicate that you see their actual capacity and you're making peace with it, they can stop performing. They can show up as they actually are, which is the only foundation for genuine connection. The relationship becomes about what's actually present rather than what's wished for. And ironically, this reality-based connection is often more satisfying than the fantasy-based alternative.